Hello and welcome to a new webcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askary and today is June the 1st. As everybody is aware now that we have actually an international crisis. We have the ongoing war in Ukraine and we have a global both energy crisis and a food crisis, not merely as a result of this war, but this war have augmented, magnified this problem which existed before. And people in Europe are acutely aware of the power shortage or the rise in the prices of gas and electricity and everything. But in Europe, although it's developed and industrialized nations, we feel the pain of that increase. But in other parts of the world, there are nations who cannot afford this rise of fuel, power prices, and food prices. Some nations have both food crisis and power crisis. So in this light, we have been looking at other parts of the world. We're not going to discuss Europe today, but we will go to Africa today and discuss the current situation with the power sector, energy supplies. We'll not discuss the food and other matters, but in terms of what is possible in terms of building infrastructure. So we will focus today on Africa's power sector, the challenges and the potential, and what are the ways of dealing with this problem. There is a famous image of Africa by night, taken by NASA satellites. And then we have another image which I and others have developed, which is of Africa, where to go from now to 2050, how Africa should look like. And to discuss this matter, I have with me today two distinguished guests, Miss Princy Mthombeni. She's the founder of Africa4Nuclear, joining us from South Africa. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Hussein. Lovely to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate you took the time to be with us. And I have also with me my friend, Jason Ross. He's the scientific advisor of the Schiller Institute.
Thanks, Hussein. Glad to be here. Nice.
Jason and I, of course, old friends. We together worked on the book length special report extending the new Silk Road to West Asia and Africa, which is available on Amazon and also on the website of the Schiller Institute. I would like to start first with the Princy on the challenges to the power sector in Africa. First of all, tell us about your own experience and also what are the big problems in Africa in terms of power access to electricity, and how to manage this challenge to raise the power production in Africa to the level at least of a middle income nation.
Thank you so much for the question, Hussein. I think there's quite a few challenges facing the power sector in Africa. I'd like to speak about the per capita consumption of energy in sub-Saharan Africa with the exclusion of South Africa. It is 180 kilowatt per hour, which compared to 13,000 kilowatt per hour in the US and 6,500 kilowatt per hour in Europe. And the world average is about 3,500 kilowatt per hour. And I mean, this means that Africa is like 20 times lesser than the world average. So if we are talking about powering up Africa, that means we would need to increase the electricity generation 20 times the current capacity, and to at least meet the world average. That's so to me, access to modern clean energy is critical for the success of global efforts to address energy. Lack of funding for energy projects on the African continent. I think that political and credit risks have actually remained critical factors that hindering potential investors from investing in the energy sector here in Africa. And I am of the view that to alleviate this, Africa would need to come up with new and innovative solutions, funding solutions and approaches which really would advance the African landscape. And if they are successful in this, they actually can, and if they are successful in these efforts, they would be able to expedite the direct foreign investments, and which will renew the investor confidence. And the second challenge that is, of course, the challenges that are linked to mineral resources of the African continent, such as coal, gas, and others. And with lack of technology advancements, many African countries do have mineral resources, but there's lack of technology advancements to harness these resources. And of course, if we were to be able to harness them and utilize these resources, it goes back to the same issue of funding. And the last issue that I would like to highlight is, of course, the issue of political instability on the African continent. I would use the example of the Inga Dam. You know, if Inga Dam was, the project was successful, they would be able to power up at least a quarter of the African continent. So so issues of political instability also remain really a major challenge according to me. And so it's really, I hope that one day we'll be able to sort out this particular issue. But the issue of energy, lack of energy, funding is the main one. And if we were to be able to address that first, then the rest would follow.
Yeah. First of all, I mean, the Chinese president, when he was in South Africa in 2015 for the summit of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation, the FOCAC summit, he said something quite remarkable. What it's to the point you are mentioning. He said there are three bottlenecks of development in Africa, as we experienced also in China before. And he said the lack of capital, financing, the lack of infrastructure, and the lack of skilled labor. Now, you mentioned the fact that there is the lack of capital and funding, which is a problem. I mean, the Chinese president said if we tackle these three problems, Africa's industrialization would be as possible as we managed in China itself. But on the lack of infrastructure, I mean, of course, we have the transport, we have the water management, we have other problems. But on the electricity, what is the status of the access to electricity of the African people, of at least sub-Saharan Africa?
Hussein, Africa is home to 17% of the world's population, but accounts just for 4% of the world's power, which is the lowest in the world. And in a population of about 1.5 billion people, over 600 million of those people do not have access to electricity. And around 900 million of those people lack access to clean cooking, because when you speak about the electricity, we are not just talking about the light bulb. So 900 million of those people do not have access to clean cooking. And United Nations predicts that the African population would have doubled by 2050. Amounting to approximately 2.5 billion people, with electricity demand expected to triple by 2040. So that's basically is the situation.
Yeah, that's of course one of the major impediments to economic development. We have experienced this kind of problem in other parts of the world, but now it's acute in Africa. But my question to Jason is, what, from your scientific economic standpoint, what does it mean to have little or no electricity in a society today?
Well, Hussein, electricity is something that is so fundamental to economic development that if we were to compare it to, say, the evolution of life, if we look at life moving from being chemotrophs, the early life that we might see today in deep sea vent, biology, where the energy comes from chemicals coming out of the Earth's crust, this is extremely limited. And the development of photosynthesis opened up to life an entirely new power source and allowed the explosion of life on the Earth, the creation of complex plants, animals, and all of this. It's similar with electricity. Both energy in general is required to achieve a certain standard of living, and electricity in particular is the most intense and important form of power that we have today. So if you draw up charts looking country by country or even region by region around the world, and you compare electricity consumption with such indicators as GDP, with life expectancy, with infant mortality, you find by and large there's a tremendous correlation there, which comes from the fact that electricity simply allows so many other processes. And Princy had mentioned clean cooking, which is something that maybe people don't think about if they're not familiar with regions where cooking comes from using biomass and burning it directly in the home for cooking. Compared to natural gas or electricity or bottled gas, this is extremely polluting. So many of the arguments that are used against developing power systems on the basis of environmental degradation or on pollution miss the fact that these systems have the effect of reducing the experienced pollution of people able to benefit from cleaning up cooking, for example, and then having access to better hospital systems, to sanitation, to be able to pump water, to treat wastewater. These things are extremely important for the lived environment of human beings, and we're the most important thing on the planet, So I think that we need to keep that in mind and not allow what is expressed as environmental concerns to be used to have an impact that holds people back and harms their lives. And electricity in particular is an area where I think nothing should stand in the way of eliminating energy poverty on the planet. People are the most important goal here.
Yeah. Well, I think there are. You mentioned the fact that the environmental matters are discussed here to actually. Some people try to push projects in Africa, and I'm going to name a couple of projects in Africa. One of them under the Obama administration, one of them under the Trump administration for Africa. China, U.S. Africa cooperation. When you see, there are two fundamental problems with that. First of all, the Obama administration Power Africa, which was launched in 2013, although it admits that the need in Africa is about $300 billion in investments, it could garner only $14 billion in promised, pledges by both the U.S. state agencies, like $7 billion, and the rest from the private sector. Now, there are two big problems. First of all, the magnitude it's silly, what is needed and what is being proposed there's a huge discrepancy. The other problem is that there's a massive emphasis on renewables, that is solar and wind power. The other emphasis on that the private sector should finance these investments. Now, what happened is that after 3 years of the Power Africa project, only $4 billion in contracts were signed. And then the US Exim Bank, which was supposed to finance most of the project, the US Congress killed the Exim Bank. It did not renew the authorization for the Exim Bank so it can issue credits for these projects. So the whole project ended up with only 4,000 megawatts of power, where the needs of Africa or sub-Saharan Africa, it was dedicated for sub-Saharan Africa, was, it was just minuscule. So the whole Power Africa, which Obama launched, by the way, from South Africa in 2013, it died. It never reached any achievements, both because of the emphasis on, it's a small scale, but also emphasis on renewables, but also the emphasis on the private sector. Trump administration launched Prosper Africa initiative, but the intention was already geopolitical. The man who announced it in 2019 was John Bolton, the national security advisor. So the whole idea was geopolitical, to put an end to China's and Russia's influence in Africa. So, but then it revived the Exim Bank, but the biggest loan went to a massive natural gas exploration project in Mozambique, offshore project. And they managed to raise from the US $5 billion, from Japan and Britain and France and other countries, totally $20 billion. Never happened in history of Africa, but the whole thing was to extraction of gas, not to power Africa, but to make sure that the clients of Russia have enough alternatives of gas. And President Trump said it will provide 17,000 jobs, not in Africa, but in 5 American states. So, but then the whole project failed because the Islamic State attacked that region in Mozambique, and the whole project was shut down. So these are 2 examples of initiatives to help Africa in this sense, but there is a massive problem with the method and the financing of it.
Hussein, I think that the term that African states are independent, sovereign states, it's just a dream because there's still a lot of Western influence around our states and around decisions that are made when it comes to big projects or our projects that relate to that or that affect our resources, which is really a very disturbing issue. And I don't know why really we would say that one would block another one from coming to Africa. And
I mean, on the issue of state credit, I think this is something that, so in terms of independence, just coming right back to this theme, many countries in Africa don't have sovereignty over their currencies, for example. I mean, the franc controlled through France still exists, too widely. It makes some of these things difficult when you don't have autonomy and independence, is what the failure of the past decades has been on the part of the Bretton Woods institutions. I mean, the World Bank had a mandate for development. That was Franklin Roosevelt's intention. I think it's, by any reasonable interpretation, it's failed at that mandate compared to what it could have achieved. The same with the IMF. So that for concern about debt traps and things like this that are expressed today, their books have been written by, for example, John Perkins, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, where he describes how debt was deliberately used as a weapon to prevent development in order to maintain a condition of export of raw materials and preventing nations from moving up the value chain and engaging in more industry with those materials and instead exporting them directly. And that was a conscious evil policy. And that's something that has to be reckoned with and addressed with really a new global framework for development.
Yeah. Now we want to go to, we can come back to this question of renewables, the focus, too much focus in Europe and the United States on renewables in Africa. But my question to Princy, because you are the founder of the Africa4Nuclear. What is Africa4Nuclear, and why nuclear power, in your view, is the solution for Africa's power shortages?
Okay, Africa4Nuclear is a campaign that aims to promote nuclear as a key contributor to achieving the African Union Agenda 2063. And we are a think tank in nuclear issues in Africa. And basically, our vision is to see nuclear as a driving force to achieving the agenda for sustainable development in the African continent. We have quite a few messages that we are sending out to people. And one of them, which is the main one, is that nuclear can contribute to end energy poverty in the African continent. And why we think that nuclear is really a solution to ending the energy poverty in the African continent is because the African continent has an aspiration of being a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. And when you speak that line, you are immediately touching on the issues of civilization. You are also touching on the issues that have been addressed by the African Union, which they call the triple threats. And it's the threat of poverty, inequality, and underdevelopment. And when you speak about these three issues, it all boils down to addressing the energy poverty, which is the major challenge in the African continent, because you cannot speak about the issues of quality when over 600 million people still do not have access to electricity. So it's basically that. And we see nuclear as a contributor because nuclear is able to offer the baseload power source. Many nations across the world were able to industrialize through fossil fuels, such as coal. And that actually includes South Africa and even in the North Africa. So if you were to replace coal, because now we are speaking about the net zero emissions, carbon emissions by 2050. So now, how are we going to replace the baseload coal power source? Because it will not be replaced by the intermittent renewables. So we believe that if we now say to African continents, include nuclear as part of the energy mix, together with renewables, so that nuclear will be able to offer the baseload power source that is needed to enhance the infrastructure development in the African continent.
Yeah, but are you finding some resistance, for example, that there are certain concerns? We have, even here in the West, although we use nuclear power to a large extent there is a massive campaign against nuclear power, spreading fear of the radiation and other consequences of using, nuclear waste and so on. How do you tackle these issues in Africa?
Thank you for touching on that. In Africa, the anti-nuclear movement, it's everywhere, even in the African continent. And I don't know if it's thrive in the African continent. I can say that because to this date, we have not been able to develop our nuclear program. Luckily enough, Egypt is next to build the nuclear power, which is really good news. But yeah, we also facing the anti-nuclear movement. But what is really different in the African continent is that the ordinary people are not resistant to nuclear. They do not know about it. And that's where now the Africa4Nuclear comes in to say, how do we then increase the public awareness of nuclear so that people can know about it? And knowing Africans, once they know about the nuclear source, they would be able to now make noise and talk to their government and convince those that need to be convinced to say, let's develop our continent or our nations using nuclear energy. So yeah, it's a matter of now educating the public more, but we also do have anti-nuclear lobby groups in the African continent. And
yeah, great. Well, Jason, why, in your view, and I know your view, why is our viewers need to know, why is nuclear power superior to other forms of power, like renewables, like fossil fuels, and what else can a nation benefit from nuclear technology other than producing energy?
I'd answer by starting from looking at power sources and looking at three categories and how we've changed from them over historical time. Physical power sources, chemical power sources, nuclear power sources. So with physical power sources, we're dealing with things that are really created by the earth and the sun, things like flowing water, air, these kinds of motions that we're able to use and have used for a long time to drive mills and early factories and this kind of thing. There's a limit. There's a serious limit on that. With chemical fuels, we get much more energy, and we have the ability to make it portable. So for example, if you are able to transport coal from one place to another, you no longer have to be located next to a river to be able to have production. You can transport the coal, which is compact, small enough that you can bring it to either a factory directly in the early days or now to a power plant. And you can transport the energy on a cable instead of having to bring, coal across the road. With nuclear power, the inherent energy of nuclear reactions compared to chemical reactions is on the order of, it's 5 or 6 orders of magnitude, 1 million times more energy in, say, a simple fusion reaction compared to combustion of methane, to take the simplest chemical fuel, natural gas, 1 million times more energy per mass. So what you're dealing with is an enormous efficiency in terms of getting the fuel, the amount of uranium that's required. I mean, you do have to concentrate to get the isotope that you want, but overall, compared to coal, much less in terms of mining, much less labor involved in all of this. So in terms of the cost to society, physically, labor cost, capital cost, it has the potential to be far more effective than coal or hydrocarbons, and definitely compared to physical sources of power like wind or sunlight or this sort of thing, which is just very spread out, not concentrated. Another thing is that you can use it, you think of nuclear usually as providing a baseline supply. You can also think about going beyond your baseline with nuclear as well. And when it's not needed for electricity, this is an opportunity to, for example, create synthetic fuels, create hydrogen fuel, create synthetic liquid fuels for things like vehicles, transportation that are not electrified. This is another benefit. And overall, the development of a society, of a nation, of a culture, of a society that has nuclear power, that has the expertise to run plants, process fuel or whatnot, it helps drive an overall increase in the mental infrastructure as a society committing to a higher level of education, of expertise. So those are the main reasons. The biggest one, and the main reason that nuclear had been sought after as such a fantastic opportunity for efficient fuel use, is the enormous energy density. The fact that you get so much more, 1 million times more power per mass compared to hydrocarbons. This is the real driver for nuclear as a technology.
Yeah, Princy, are there other benefits you are seeking from developing nuclear power in Africa besides power generation?
Of course, there are. I would start with the issues of water scarcity on the African continent. Many African parts, we are facing water challenges, water scarcity challenges, and nuclear can be able to solve that issue through a application called water desalination, where they take seawater and change it into drinking water. And I heard that quite a few countries are also looking into that, including Sierra Leone. They are looking into that application of nuclear. Also, in South Africa, South Africa is among top 4 countries in the world that manufacture and distribute nuclear medicine. And I think that that's another application that needs to be explored further by other African continents. Somebody from another country was telling me that they have to travel about 200 kilometers to get to, where they are going to use their radiotherapy. So which is really sad, and there's only about 1 or 2 in one country. which I find it very, very, very sad. So I think that's another application that this continent should explore, so that we are able to address the challenge of people having to now travel kilometers to get help. And the last one obviously would be the agriculture sector. Yes, I had an interview with one of the student from the Namibian University, who was telling me about this exciting project that he's involved in, which is about growing crops in Namibia, which I also think that it should spread further. And the last one, which is exciting one for me, it's still under research and development. It's called the Rhizotope Project. And this is the project that actually is going to help save rhino from being poached, which, rhinos are very special animals in the African continent, and the rhino poaching is a big challenge as well. So with nuclear, they will be able to address those issues. And I think that what they say is that they are going to put the isotope inside the rhino horn, so that they would be able to track it as they steal it and try to answer. So this is a very exciting project, and I'm looking forward to see the development of it.
Yeah, of course, we will have the link to your website or your YouTube channel, so people can follow the interviews you are doing with all kinds of experts, and people can follow your work. You mentioned the question of water desalination as one of the applications, and also the question of Egypt, because one of the important aspects of the new power plants they are building in Al Dab'a is in a very dry area on the Mediterranean, and water desalination is one of the issues there. The other issue is that, unfortunately, Europe and the United States are not contributing to the development of nuclear power in Africa. Therefore, these nations have to resort to Russia or China. In the best case, South Korea, but that's very limited because of political influence on Africa. So now Russia and China have the nuclear power cooperation agreements with many nations in Africa, and this is lacking here in Europe and the United States. The other issue, of course, besides the fact that people say why Africa should have nuclear power, you have so much solar potential and so on. I think we already discussed that, but there's also the question of financing and also efficiency of doing things, because as I mentioned, all these initiatives from Europe, from the United States, these are small scale, they depend on donor nations and so on, but we have very potent methods of financing infrastructure, especially energy. I mean, you take the case of Egypt, this is not nuclear, but I mean, in the nuclear, they have this agreement with Russia. It's like 5,000 megawatts of power, but because of power shortage in Egypt, many industries stopped functioning, like textile industry, cement and steel industry. So they decided on an emergency basis to contract the German Siemens for a complex of gas-driven, gas-powered power plants, and they got credit from Germany, export credits, and this was whole state financed. And they managed to build 14,000 megawatts of power in a record 27 months and finance it. But that was because Egypt as a state, Germany as a state were behind the financing issue. And this is a big obstacle in many other parts of Africa, because the capability to get the state credit is very difficult. I will just mention a few things which I have written about on this potency to finance and build power projects. Now, we have been following the Belt and Road Initiative and also China's investments in many continents, but also in Africa. I will just mention a few statistics from the database from the Boston University Global China Project database. These are not China friendly, but they track all investments by Chinese state policy banks. These are the China Development Bank, the Import Bank, and other major Chinese banks. And between 2008 and 2018, they financed like several thousand infrastructure projects focused on infrastructure. But of these, 777 power plants were built overseas. And of course, the hydropower was generating 50,000 megawatts. We had the coal power, which is now China also stopped because of pressure, 74,000 megawatts of power. We had 10,000 megawatts of oil and gas, but also solar, 8,000 megawatts, and nuclear has a small share, but China is also working on nuclear power development. We see that in Pakistan, they have 3 nuclear power plants, 2 completed 2 years ago and last year, and 1 is under construction. But in Africa, Chinese investments involved about $46 billion for transport, but also $36 billion for power. And these power projects, they generated around 27,000 megawatts of power in Africa. This is about what the Power Africa intention was behind the Obama administration, but China managed to do that without much of fuss. But most of these projects are large-scale, power-intensive, either hydropower, coal power, or nuclear power, or oil and gas power, but very small portion is solar and wind power. But the issue is also that there is China's financial might is behind it. So the state can issue credit to finance these projects. Now, this is lacking in how we in Europe and the United States are dealing with Africa. We want the private sector to do everything.
I think that whoever comes to invest in Africa should come with an open mind or a mind to solve the challenges that are facing Africa. And that is to power up Africa, and that is to address issues of unemployment rate. Because, Africans, they go outside Africa seeking greener pastures. So if you come to Africa and you are going to address the issue of unemployment and the issue of poverty, then to us, really, we are willing to do, I think our government should be willing to do businesses with that person. And those that really, with regards to Germany wanting to use the private sector to do everything, private sector is ruthless. Capitalism is ruthless, but we can't do away with it also, because there are also issues that they are able to address when they come to a country. And so I think it's a matter of choosing correctly and managing those relationships in a way that they are beneficial for the African continent. Obviously, people come here with their own agenda and wanting to benefit. But if it's a win-win situation, why not invest with all these countries that want to come to Africa? So yeah, I support all the relations or international relations and relationship and business relationship that non-African countries want to come to Africa and do.
I guess maybe just one aspect in terms of what I've seen here in the United States or in Europe, one of the issues is that you have to, of course, make a profit if you're going to be a private investor. And projects that have indirect benefits where you can't, draw income from the benefits that that service is providing are very difficult to finance in a purely private way. Now, private contractors, of course, the government doesn't need to, get so much detailed about doing everything. But in terms of financing, because indirect benefits are really hard to capitalize on or monetize, that's just one of the big limits for private investment for infrastructure. Now, a power plant, maybe it's more direct because you can sell the power, of course. But with the electrification of the rural United States, most of the benefit, of course, does not come in terms of energy sales by the power companies. It's the overall economic improvement, where some of the government projects that brought electricity to rural areas in the United States, like my grandparents, these were government financed, at least through government loans. And just the increase in tax revenues indirectly could pay back these projects. That's something that the government as a whole can capture. Just one other thing, as you know, speaking as an American, you know, I see here's my country, you know, ready to spend 40 billion, you know, at the drop of a hat almost on weapons sales and things like this, weapons that are going to go who knows where in Ukraine, you know, target practice for the Russians practically. But, you know, say where is the support? Where is the U.S. Export-Import Bank, for example, in supporting, let's say, an American contractor or engineering firm that would like to have stable financing to get more involved overseas? And that's the kind of facility that the U.S. I'm very happy about what China's doing, just as a person in the world, the kind of financing they're making available. I don't want to see it as sort of a U.S. versus China thing. I want to change the United States so that the U.S. also is actually playing a constructive role, and that U.S. companies are able better to get involved. And yeah.
Well, sure. I mean, the question of infrastructure is that's why, you know, in Europe and the United States, it was the state which financed these things, because what you are looking for is not financial benefit, but the economic benefit for society from cheap energy, available transports, clean water. These things contribute to the growth of the economy, and also the initial capital for projects, especially large-scale power plants, for example, is very high. And no private bank would finance these with the expectation that you will get repaid in 25, 50 years from now. Nobody would invest in that, you know, private finance. They want quick return. Anyway, I think we're coming to the conclusion of our discussion, because the real issue is not simply providing a light bulb for the 600 million Africans who don't have access to electricity, although that is good. But the question is, how can we industrialize Africa? Now, Africa is 30 million square kilometers. That's 3 times larger than China. You know, you can fit China, India, the United States, and Europe in Africa in terms of space. But also we have 1.3 billion Africans. Most of them are young people. I mean, in 2050, we will have 3 billion Africans, most of them under the age of 23, while Europe, Asia, you know, most part of the world will be aging. Now, to make sure that Africa, not 2050, even earlier, we can manage the challenge of industrializing Africa, not simply providing just simple things for Africans so they can survive. I think this is a major challenge for all nations, but also, of course, for the nations of Africa themselves. But the technology is available elsewhere, and I think this is the message. I don't know if you have any message you want to send to people here in Europe or the United States on this matter. The future of Africa, not simply as not poor, but Africa as industrialized continent or nations.
So I really wish that one day we would be able to say that when we speak about Africa, we are not talking about a woman and a child at the back who is looking so hopeless and not knowing what to do their life. And so, yeah, that's really, to me, is to change the picture of the African continent and make it a picture that everyone would, you know, feel proud to look at. And I wish that one day UNESCO would be able to pack their bags and go, so that we are no longer, you know, seen as people who are really hopeless and need help of the world. Yeah, so I plead to our government to say we have a perception, we have a picture of the African continent that is portrayed to the global world and to the world, which we need to change, and it's their responsibility that that picture changes, and they need to take accountability now. And if the African Union is serious about wanting a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, they would start addressing their energy mix and include nuclear as soon as possible. Because when we speak about issues of energy, we need to address both short-term and long-term goals. And what they are focusing on now is short-term goals. And then what will happen after 10 years? So after 20 years, when we've built those renewable power plants, and we are realizing that they are really not addressing the issues that we wanted them to address, we now have to go back to the drawing board and say, let's think about nuclear. Will it not be too late by then? Yeah. So I just wish that we start addressing the energy mix that includes nuclear now. And in the case of Africa, of South Africa, which is about to decommission 10 to 24 megawatts of their coal power plants, I wish that they would also now be serious about replacing this baseload power with nuclear. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Well said. I think we can, with that, we can conclude this fascinating discussion. I thank you again, Ms. Princy Mthombeni from Africa4Nuclear, and Jason Ross from the Schiller Institute. As I said, we will have the links to your website so people can contact you and watch the work you are doing. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Hussein. Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Grateful to be a part of this discussion.